Welcome, everybody. I am guessing most of you are here today because of the title of this talk. Maybe it's something that you are familiar with, something that perhaps you have experienced in your day-to-day career, and you're curious as to what somebody with the title Chief Agile Architect could possibly have to say about why Agile is indeed a four-letter word. So who am I? Jen Krieger. I work with the Red Hat Products and Technologies division, and basically what that means is I work with the teams that produce our product line. Most of the teams are trying to do things a little bit differently, so they look towards people like me to help them, I guess, figure out what might apply or work well for them as teams. And largely the teams I work with are the teams that produce OpenShift, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the Atomic Host. I pretty much work with anybody who actually has a question. So I work with a lot of different products. And before we move on to the next slide, what I wanted to ask you all is that there will be a survey at the end. Last year, everybody, I had a bunch of people here and they all filled it out, but my survey data was lost. So if you have time to fill out the survey, I'd love to have feedback on what it is that I'm talking about today so that I get better at presenting in future talks. So please fill out the survey at the end of the talk. The terrible history of Agile as told by me. So it's all contextual and based in what I experienced as a technologist growing up in software development over the last 20 years. So if this doesn't look exactly like what you experienced, I apologize, but I'm also interested in hearing about your own experience. So please feel free to reach out to me and tell me more about what it is that you've experienced. I was at a dinner a few nights ago with one of my friends who is a friend from high school, and she was telling me a story about how the project manager on her project was, I guess she decided the next thing for her career was to go out and get a Certified Scrum Master certification. So she went off to this class for 3 days, and she spent a lot of money, the company's money, and she got this certification. She came back to the team and she said, gosh, there's all this stuff that I learned, and we should take this stuff and immediately apply it to everything that we're doing today. And she just walked right into the team and said, we will do Scrum. Now, the problem with that is pretty simple in this case, is that the team is a two-person team. And one of the people on this team was only working 4 hours a week. So the idea of doing Scrum with a two-person team, which is really more like 1.25 people, is kind of a little heavy-handed. But it is an illustration of how the certification engine that is behind Agile has created this concept of the terrible history. My experiences with Agile went something to the tune of this story that I'm going to tell you, and here's my obligatory cat picture. And there will be many more cat pictures, but in any case, somewhere around the 2005-ish, was in a meeting with the director of my software development team, and she said, I was at a meeting and I heard something called Agile, and it was this thing that sounded really great, and I want you guys to go out and learn what it is and just do it. And the intention behind that just learn what it is and do it statement was the other side of the fence, which was it would take the teams that I was working with something to the tune of 6 to 9 months to deliver one really usable feature. So in her mind, she was looking at this from the perspective of Agile promises this delivery, this cadence, this thing that I'm going to be able to give to the business customers. She was thinking that it would just be an instantaneous thing and she'd be able to show her teams doing Agile and immediately deliver value to our business partners. So we went off to this really, really long, I feel like it was like 2 weeks long, but I'm pretty sure it was only 2 days long, Agile training in which some guy stood up in front of us and spent pretty much a minute and a half on the principles behind Agile, and then the rest of the 2 days on all of the framework of Scrum and how to do Scrum and all the reasons why you do certain things a certain way, and estimations and how to do them properly, and how do you create a roadmap, and how do you do all these crazy things that surround Scrum. And so in this 2-day class, we forgot that first couple of minutes of the training. We instantly forgot all of it. because it wasn't the focus of the training. We just heard you do sprints, you get 2 weeks are great, you do estimates, you do user stories, here's how you do all those things, you do retrospective, blah, 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 and we just said, forget that human stuff. And so what wound up happening is we left that meeting and we just implemented the mechanics of Scrum. And so we didn't really learn anything about communicating. We didn't really learn anything about the true fundamental purpose of Agile, in that we wanted to continuously improve the situation. We wanted to continuously learn about what we were not doing so great and try to modify it for the future. And to be fair to the team at the time, we were also pretty constrained by the technology of the day. 10 years ago, there wasn't anything like a microservice. So if we were to make a change to the application that we were building on, just one minor change over here in the code base would cascade through the entire application and kick off another 6-month manual QA testing cycle. So trying to implement Agile in this environment, it was successful in the tune that we were actually, doing the meetings and having the daily, stand-up meetings, and we were doing all the things that would make us good Scrum framework followers, but we were doing none of the other things that were important in order for us to really realize the value of Scrum. And I would say that most of us in this room probably have experienced something like this at their companies, or have heard somebody who has had this type of experience before. Where I generally feel like the industry has failed are a few high-level areas. Most of the folks who I've talked to who have tried to implement something with their teams has done so with the intention of only targeting a team. And so they've not actually looked at their organization as a system, as something that is something from point A all the way to point Z. And so they focus on that one team and they say, we will get better at what we do if we focus on the developer and we make sure that that developer is, delivering features, and everything else around that doesn't really matter because it's really the feature that is most important. And so when we implemented the framework of Scrum, we failed to realize that there was a larger organizational problem in that the business really didn't want to be involved in what we were doing. They just said, do this feature and we'll come back and talk to you in 6 months, which sounded very familiar and very similar to waterfall software development. They didn't want to be involved in the day-to-day aspects of that cadence and that feedback loop. They didn't really care to, and they didn't have the time to. And so because we didn't focus on organizational change, the why don't you have time? Why don't you want to be involved? Isn't this important to you? Shouldn't you be here? Shouldn't you come to the table with your thoughts on a daily basis? I would say that most organizations fail to realize that change. And I would say also, too, the failure here, too, is that Scrum is largely selected as the methodology of choice because, and this is the thing that is my own opinion, you might feel otherwise, it looks most like waterfall. And so it's just a shorter waterfall loop. To me, if you just take the framework and you put it into place and you're doing 2-week sprints, sure, without realizing any of the other benefits of what Agile might bring to the table in self-reflection and introspection and human communication, you just have a very short waterfall cycle. And so it's the easiest thing for that other side of the fence, which is the project management community, who was used to doing things a certain way. And when Agile came along, or really Scrum came along and started to become this new hot thing, they had to relearn what it was that they were doing before, which was very command and control driven. And so do this now. And so instead of serving the team, they still think, even today, that the team serve them. And so when you put a project manager into a position and they're suddenly thinking, well, gosh, what is this new Scrum Master role? And it looks awfully like my role. And so it's just another certification that I should get, and I'll just go get the certification, and I'll come back from training, and I'll tell my 2-person team that we're going to do Scrum. And that is one of the failures of how we have spoken about Agile since its inception. And part of this has to do with the way that the certifications have kind of come out of the industry. Everybody wants to say, I am a Scrum Master, or I am good at Agile, or this is the thing that validates me as knowing all of the things. And so this certification engine was created initially with very good intentions. They wanted to give people the knowledge that they needed to do it correctly, right? I don't think anybody who came up with this idea of teaching Scrum for 2 weeks or a 2 days class had any sort of intention that they thought that it was going to just be a revenue stream for someone 10 years after they started the class, and therefore the focus would then be driving the revenue stream rather than driving the educational component of it. They really honestly did not start it that way, but the problem is that it became so popular so quickly that I think the engine left the gate too quickly, and they couldn't keep up with that. It's not about making money, it's about the education. And so the certification industry hasn't helped us in any way, shape, or form. And so if somebody comes to you and says, I know everything, I have a CSM, you can say, okay, great, how long have you been actually working with teams? If that person says, I've been working with teams as a CSM for like 2 weeks, generally I might say something to the tune of, okay, when you've been working with teams for 15 years, then maybe you'll know something that will help work with all different teams, all different people, all different scenarios. I mean, the bottom line here is that there's no one certification that anybody's going to be able to give anyone that will help them know what to do in every single situation, because teams are made up of people, and unless anybody tells you otherwise, you are unique, and therefore you're going to be in a unique situation. So when talking about failure, I want to talk specifically about some of the Agile Manifesto's principles. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I do want to talk about 3 specific ones. This graphic, if you have not heard of Lynn Sazali yet, she is pretty fantastic. She goes to conferences and does like a visual drawing of pretty much all of what she's heard. And I love them because they are not words in just straight text on a slide. So look her up and check her out. But this is her visualization of the 16 principles that come out of the Agile Manifesto. My favorite one as an open sourcer is build projects around motivated individuals. That's my favorite one. So if you've not heard of that one before, you probably don't understand 100% the whole foundational Agile idea, like where it came from. So Agile principle number 1 I'm going to talk about. Deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter timescale. And so this is by far one of the most important principles to me. It does not explicitly state do 2-week sprints. And how many of you, by show of hands, immediately thought that when you read that principle? Anybody? Yeah. It doesn't mean 2-week sprints. It just means deliver something, working preferably, frequently. And so for me, that word deliver is the key part of that. It's where. What are you delivering? Who are you delivering it to? When are you delivering it? It's not just about delivering to your customer. It's delivering to version control so that your coworkers can do a code review. It's delivering to CI so that you can run automated tests. Delivering to potentially a third-party QE organization who will run integration tests on your code. There's layers of delivery involved in this, and it's not just talking about that one big bang delivery at the end where you give the baked product to your customer. The showing people what you've done every 2 weeks and doing a sprint demo is a method of delivery. And so defining that method of delivery is important. And so part of the trouble that I referred to earlier is that teams generally look at Agile and they look at this whole situation from a very specific point of view, in that when they first are introduced to Scrum specifically, or really any Agile situation, there's a heavy focus placed on feature work. Feature is king, I think I said earlier. And the problem with that is that rarely, if ever, does the team get time to focus on the other parts of product delivery. One of the most common things that happens with the teams I work with at Red Hat is that they focus on these features. And they really don't get so much time to work on technical debt or the things that are troubling them about their own workflow. They really don't get a whole lot of time to focus on bug fixing. And so bug fixing then becomes something that you do right before a release goes out. And trying to get teams to understand that the feature, yes, is important. It's always important, but also is reduction of technical debt, like simple things as simple as you don't have a common development environment and it's causing problems. Maybe you want to do something about that. Or you put some code into place that was a little bit shaky, but you wanted to get the feature out to a product owner or a product manager so they could see how it would work. But there's all this stuff underneath that you have to harden and make a little bit more realistic for actually putting an enterprise product in front of a customer. These are the types of things that don't get as much focus in Agile teams. And it's problematic because, as you might guess, then you get into this cycle where you're not really focusing on making good product. You're just focusing on getting that feature out the door as quickly as possible. And as I said before, the word deliver isn't really clearly defined. And so my solution for this for all teams that I work for is to understand the different layers of the onion of delivery that teams are supposed to actually know about, like that whole concept of version control. When I first joined engineering in Red Hat, I did have a conversation with one of the engineers that I worked with about the fact that we didn't have continuous integration in place. And the response I got, well, it will not work in the environment that I'm working on it because of these 90 different reasons. And okay, but my general response to that is then figure it out because you're smart, so figure it out. And it wasn't until that point that I made it a priority for him that he thought it would be something he should focus on. So it's important for teams to understand that defining what delivery means for them is very critical. So where are you delivering, when are you delivering it, and what are you delivering? And also allowing the teams to drive down that technical debt and also drive down the outstanding bugs. And not doing it right before a product release is critical. So principle number 2, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. And I have no idea what I'm doing. Anybody else? So what does technical excellence mean? Anybody? Yeah, don't screw up. Anybody else?
The opposite of technical debt.
Yeah, technical excellence. It's a term I use internally at Red Hat a lot, and everybody's like, technical, you could be a great engineer. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a great engineer? Does being a great engineer mean that you go into code and you leave it worse off than where you started? Or do you go into code and maybe fix something that you saw that probably should be fixed and it'll take you 30 seconds to fix it, but you do it because it's the right thing to do? Technical excellence means you put continuous integration in place because you know it's the best practice. And for that matter, technical excellence also means that you know what the best practices are. So if you are a project manager and you are taking this certified Scrum Master training and you're going to this course, and then you now have this sort of certification, you're going to go and you're going to be the Scrum Master for a bunch of teams, and you show up and the team is only going to work to features and you have a Gantt chart and you're tracking towards features and you know a certain thing, what's the likelihood that you're going to be okay with the idea that a team needs time to put continuous integration in place? I was that project manager, yeah. I was that project manager who said, we don't have time for that because I see this date right here that you agreed to, and I know how much time it's going to take you to get from here to here, and you don't have time for that. And I didn't take the time as a project manager in those early days to understand that if I gave them time up here, I would actually get more out of them later on, but I just knew that my past experiences with engineering teams up to that point had been waiting, like here, me waiting for like 6 to 9 months for anything to come out of the team. It would be like put a requirement to a black box and you just sit there and you wait. And so for me, giving them or allowing them to work on something like that wasn't a priority for me. And so as you might imagine, the other part of this too is organizational change wasn't really a priority, if you believe that to be true. what tends to happen is the focus is placed on that developer, not so much on an operations like a system admin or a security expert or a performance person, UX. They don't really get a seat at the table if you are doing it the way that a traditional IT shop would do. Typically what winds up happening in my experience has been that the developer would be solely responsible for some version of what it is the feature looks like, and then they might have like a board that they sit in front of and they get feedback on what they've done, or you try to maybe do it sooner so that it doesn't kind of create a slowdown later on. But there is some sort of like auditing function that says this is good or this isn't good. And then you might have to refactor or redo something, right? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Yeah, right? So instead of trying to get those people into the process, into the actual gathering of requirements, into the actual conversation with your business customers or with product management if you're R&D, trying to get them sooner in the game causes a situation where you've got a very siloed approach to rolling out something in your organization. And it causes this idea that frankly, there's this idea that a team can do all of these things, that a team can be a security expert, that a team can be a performance expert, that a team can be, whatever expert you want to be. And while I think that some stuff can be generalized, I would say it would be a very big disservice, especially to some of the folks I know at Red Hat, to say anybody can do the type of like performance work a performance engineer can do. It's just, it's an area of specialty that is hard to recreate in an Agile team, in a Scrum team. And so subject matter experts involved too late, and it's a traditional problem. Project managers really only want you to get your work done. They're not interested in the technical part of what you're doing. And I don't know, sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. And so here's my solution. Everything that you can automate, you should. And there should be nothing that you can't automate now. I mean, you may struggle with the idea that you have to, if you are in a certain company, you may have to purchase something, right? But a lot of what we do at Red Hat is automated with open source technology. And I know that a lot of other companies do this with open source technology. Most of what you need to do can be automated. And whatever you can do to do that should be done. I'm not saying spend the next 6 months automating your process and not delivering any features. One of the teams that I worked with very early in my career did not upgrade their .NET framework for literally 5 major versions. And so when we finally got to the point at which we had to upgrade .NET, how long do you think it took them? Anybody have an idea, a guess? 6 months? Anybody else? 3 years, that's on the high side. 10 months, 10 engineers in the United States, 12 in India. And that was only engineering. So, yeah. So the testing, because at the time it was all manual, was another like 8-9 months after that. So the other part of this is encouraging the growth of a DevOps community in your organization. So how many of you know the word DevOps? Yeah, great, yay, I love it. So if you don't know the word DevOps, I'm not going to talk about DevOps in this presentation. I highly encourage you to go to many of the tracks that have that word over the course of the next, yes. In fact, Gordon Half in the audience is doing an excellent presentation on DevOps. I believe it is tomorrow, correct? Yes. I highly recommend that you go and listen to that, mostly because it's been around for a while, and there is a tremendous activity in the community surrounding all of these challenges that you have to do that first bullet, which is automate. And so if you are feeling overwhelmed that you have this big pile mountain of work, there is somebody out there who's probably had that problem and might have this answer or solution to your problem. So principle number 3, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. How many hate retrospective? Yeah. Yeah, I think largely everybody who is like hating retrospective, and sometimes to be honest, I hate it too, is because it's like the same thing all the time, and you don't really see any benefit from it, maybe sometimes. Does that feel familiar? And so this is the emotional cycle of manual delivery. I like this image mostly because it is basically what my first 10 years of my IT career looked like. If you have not experienced this, there is the target ship date, and then you fail to meet the target ship date, and you go down this, holy cow, we are working 24-hour days, no one gets to sleep, everybody's drinking Diet Mountain Dew, pizza's getting ordered in, no one sees their family, does anybody, come on, this sounds familiar to everybody, right? It is basically something that has happened to everybody who has ever had a career in IT. And then eventually you actually ship the product, and then everybody goes, oh, phew. And what happens after that? Yeah. Some people actually do a retrospective, and it could potentially look like one that I've participated in, which is a gigantic Google document that's like 30 pages long, and everybody tells you what didn't go right. And then you write down actions, and then none of those things are ever done. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. And so that is the fundamental problem with introspection, is that no one actually ever does anything. And so no one really understands the true intentions behind that retrospective. And so they kind of go to them because they have to, because they're told it's part of their job, because they show up and they try to participate, but it's an uncomfortable space for them, because most of the folks I work with are introverts, so it's hard to share sometimes, right? And they don't really understand what the whole point of it is. The other thing I've observed is that project managers who took on this role of team organization like to take to-do items. And they like to do those things for teams. And so then what winds up happening is the team doesn't take ownership for actually fixing the problems that they have. And so that's the first problem. So if you've got a problem with the team, who should take responsibility to fix it? Not the Scrum Master, the team. The team should be responsible for it. And communicating that to the team is the first challenge of having retrospective. It's not the Scrum Master's responsibility. The second part of the problem is oftentimes I've observed that teams get stuck in the organizational problem layer, where they're having retrospective and they're talking about everything that is bad that they have no control over. And so a common example I like to use is with one of the teams I used to work with in corporate IT at Red Hat. We were putting a continuous delivery system in place. And one of the key designs of it was that all the environments that this system would deliver code to must be the same. If you're going to deliver to a node, and all the nodes surrounding it had to have the same software on it. But at the time, we had a situation where most of what we were doing wasn't really automated. So there was some automation in place, but it wasn't what I would call continuous automation. There was like a script you'd kick off over here, a script you'd kick off over here. And largely, environments just would become out of sync. And so this continuous delivery system would try to go and deliver to an environment that was different than its other sister node, which it would blow up, for no better term. And the team that was responsible for this node knew that it was a problem. They wanted to fix it. The problem is that they had this gigantic mountain of features off to the side that they had to deliver, and there were dates, and these dates couldn't slip. And so were they given the opportunity to work on the feature, or were they given the opportunity to fix their technical debt? It's a hard conversation for them to have, right? Because as an internal IT corporate department, they have to deliver because that's their job. And so if you were to go to a business person and say, we need to take some time to make all of our infrastructure similar so that we can do things faster, I think most business people will stop listening as you get to the infrastructure word, because it's not a feature, so they don't really understand. And so the solution is, this is where I talk about push and pull, coaching. Do it anyway. I mean, I know it hurts, right? It's a terrible thing, but you got to do it anyway. And the biggest mistake of my early days as somebody working in Agile was allowing teams not to do retrospective, because it was hard for me too. And I didn't want to have the conversation because the conversations were really hard. The problem with that, though, is that you fail to provide that space in which teams can write down what it is that they think isn't really going well. And sometimes the catharsis of just complaining about everything is all that team needed. Sometimes there isn't any action items out of what it is that you're complaining about, but it's important because you need to get to that space. But don't own the action items unless you're on the team. So other sad stories or things you should avoid from the start. The intensity of Agile. I think most teams that I've worked with in the past have this really, really hard time at avoiding this constant, like they jump on the train and the train's going 900 miles an hour and they keep on that train and they keep going and they keep going and they keep going and they keep going and eventually they fall off the train and it's a disaster, right? And what I like to say is that I was recently working with a team that had a tremendous amount of bugs, and they went through this cycle where they were like every sprint, well, all we have time for is bugs. All we have time for is bugs. Oh, here's another bug. Here's another bug. And they thought they would get to the end of their queue, and they were like, I got done with all of the bugs that I possibly could have that would break this release. And then the next morning, a new one would show up. And so after a while, this constant firefighting that they were doing was just physically breaking them down. Like they were just like, I don't even want to be at work today. And so this intense cycle, this intensity of it, they deliver, feature, feature, feature. Don't ever look at anything that you think would help you to get better at what you do, is bad. It's just categorically bad. One of the things I like to mention is my networking team had just, when I first started working with them, it was just firefighting after firefighting after firefighting. And largely it was due to the fact that not a whole lot of people know how to troubleshoot networking stuff. I don't know how to do it. And so we talked about it in retrospective, about ways that we could reduce that firefighting. And what they came up with, which was great, was a troubleshooting guide. That's a great place to start, so they could pass it off to our customer service team and say, start here, and stop sending us low-level cases that are just configuration problems. Start here. And then they built a tool that would help them troubleshoot what was happening. So instead of them having to hack on the system to figure out basic configuration so they would know what was really going on in the system, they would just send a tool to a customer and say, run this, and they would get the information that they needed back from it. And it worked for a little while, and then they went through this process, and then eventually it started to happen again. So then we went back to the team and said, what do you need to do now? And the outcome of that was we need to add more monitoring in this particular section of code so it gives us more information so we know what's going on. And so we did that. And the bottom line is that that conversation would not have occurred if I had not told them they had to do a retrospective, because the place in which we identified this and identified the solution to it was in retrospective. Otherwise, they would have just keep working on all the product management features that came in, and they would not have spent time working on what basically helped them focus on the product management features. So Agile is equal to not something faster, but not so fast you can't keep up. So I love this GIF because what I like to point out is that the older dog in the background there is walking at the pace that I want most Agile teams to walk. I want them to be steady, walking, and on course. And I want them to be able to sustain this pace for quite some time. I don't want my Agile teams to be trying to run or trying to hop onto a fast-moving, pace and then falling down on their face. And the best part about this GIF, too, is the other dog walking by distracts that puppy. And that's another thing that I don't want my Agile teams to have, is that distraction. And so not so fast that you can't keep up. And balance it with the other side of the fence, which is so slow that you just do that one thing. The behavior change. And so how many of you have a manager or a past manager in your career that was like this with you every day? Yeah, what you doing, what you doing, what you doing? So this is a sticky situation because I think what ended up happening, certainly with the Agile certification, industry, you can go out there and look for it. There's a couple of classes now that talk about the Agile manager and what managers in an Agile situation should be doing. But up until I would say maybe a couple of years ago, there wasn't a body of education for folks who were in that messy middle about what their role was for teams. And so if you are in an organization and you're changing something and you're going from one thing to another, that whole idea of organization and culture, what does that look like for you as a manager? And I like to look at Schneider's, this is a young man named Michael Sahato who drew this, and it's basically based off of a very early, I think it was like 1999 or something like that, a book by William Schneider. It's his culture chart. And it talks about the 4 main ideas of what culture could look like at a company. Collaboration, succeed by working together. Control, succeed by telling people what to do, basically. Cultivation, succeed by growing people who fill the vision. And competence, succeed by just being really good at what we do. And so most traditional organizations fall into the control and maybe a little bit of a competence area. How many of you would say that your organization is more about command and control and do what somebody is telling you to do? Yeah. It's okay, you're not getting recorded, you can raise your hands. It's okay. The problem with this is that on the Agile side of the fence, most of the focus goes into that collaboration bucket, a little bit in the cultivation. You certainly want to continuously learn what you're doing, some in competence, absolutely none in control. So if you are that manager who has had this whole career built around this idea that you are controlling a team, you are telling them what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, then you're moving to this Agile thing. How do you adjust what it is that you're thinking about what your career might be, or what it really looks like for you and your day-to-day job? So traditional managers are doing things like evaluating, controlling teams, top-down leadership. Agile managers are coaching. They're doing things more like, what is blocking you and how can I help you fix it? They're sharing information. I absolutely love something that one of our Agile managers in OpenShift started a couple of months ago. They're deep dive technology sessions for just the folks inside of Red Hat. So if you are part of a gigantic program, something to the tune of 300 engineers, how do you keep up with what the engineer sitting next to you on a different team is doing? You don't. But it's important for you to maybe be aware of what's going on, right? So that you can know. So putting engineers into a space, it kind of serves a double purpose. It teaches other people what's going on. It's almost like a 6-month-long demo. Here's what we've been working on. Here's the cool features that we have in the product now. And it's also a way for there to be kind of cross-pollination of information across the teams. And so doing this internal thing is kind of also a community building. It's making people feel part of a larger culture, part of a larger team. And so being an advocate for the team, these are things that these folks should be doing, making sure that whatever is going wrong that needs to be resolved gets fixed. And so somewhere in the middle is where people need to be as they grow into this career. I don't think you're going to be able to suddenly say that now we're Agile and now all of you managers have no business being in team meetings and we're not going to listen to you anymore. It's kind of probably not going to go well if that's the approach you take. So it's got to be something maybe a little bit less than that. Like you can be involved, but maybe you can't come to retro because it's hard for us to talk about you when you're here. That's a joke, by the way. So yeah. So what can you do? And so a lot of this stuff feels like organizational change, and it's really hard to take on organizations. I know I've tried, and it's incredibly difficult to change the way that everybody's thinking about organizational culture. So here's some simple things you can do. You can communicate. Yeah, communicate. The deep dives, perfect example. Tell people what you're working on, constantly ask questions, constantly communicate, constantly radiate information. Don't be afraid to tell others what it is that you're working on or cool things that you've tried, or ask other teams what they're working on. Create a community of practice inside of your organization. If you don't already have an engineering community of practice, start one. Just say, hey, I'm going to be in the cafeteria, or I'll be on whatever conferencing system that you guys use at this time, just to talk about whatever. You got a problem, show up, we'll talk about it. Just start something. Learn. This is I oftentimes have folks who are generally in the industry will come up to me and say, well, I've been in this job for 17 years and it's this corporation that doesn't want to do any of these cool things that you're talking about, and I have no idea what to do now because I don't really have any experience with version control. I've never used CI before in my life. I don't know what open source is. How do I change these things? And so if I say nothing that won't resonate with, well, if I say nothing that will resonate most with all of you in the room, and I think it's kind of preaching to the choir, because you're all here and you're all here to learn, is don't stop learning, and don't think that it's somebody else's responsibility to teach. And so don't wait for your manager to tell you what your goals are for the year. Set them for yourself and follow up. And don't wait for them to tell you, like at your annual review, well, you didn't meet that goal, so now you're not going to get as much, compensation as you would. Meet the goal because it's important, because you set the goal for yourself. So always learn. And when something that is going on at your organization you don't understand, like my common one that I'm constantly harping on is, what is your job? What job role do you have at your organization, and what's the definition of it? And set those rules. You don't have to be completely rigid for it, right? We all come from organizations that like everybody to do everything, right? Yeah? Yeah. So at least set some boundaries around what it is that you're supposed to be doing. Understand what other people are supposed to be doing. A lot of times when you have those communication breakdowns, it's because there's a clear or not clear. There's like a gray line in between your role and somebody else's role, and you kind of like hit heads. So understanding what somebody's role is an important thing. Define what you don't know. And if you like say something, hey manager, I want to understand what my role is. Can you please define it for me? And then they ignore you. Okay, great. Write down what you think your role is and give it to them and say, what do you think? What should I change? Just make it your responsibility. And honestly, the most important thing that you can learn and take away from this, this is a quote that I got off the internet like ages ago, written by a gentleman named John Kern. And it resonated with me because if you don't remember any of the principles, or you don't care about Scrum, or you don't care about anything else, this is the only thing you need to know in order to do right by the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. First and foremost, it's the people you work with. Don't forget them. Second, the process. And a distant third is your tools. And so if you keep it in that order, you'll be good. Thank you. I think I have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any. Or you can come up after the fact.
Do you have a pre-recorded version of this? Okay.
I think it's actually being recorded right now, and then we'll probably be on the website after the fact. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. You are not the only person who said anything like that. In fact, so I'm clear, a shout out to Karanbir Singh, who is the one who came up with the title of this talk. In a conversation I was having with him probably about 4 months ago, and I was introducing Agile to one of the teams he was on, he said, Agile's a 4-letter word. And my response was, that sounds like a conference talk. And I said, maybe I'll do that someday, and here I am. So thanks, KB. Thanks, everybody.